Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1325, dragged from the fog of sleep into a world that's as unforgiving as it is unfamiliar. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is a lumpy, half-rotted straw mattress, a scratchy nest of bugs and hay that reeks like the barn floor it was 3 months ago. No memory foam cradles your spine, no pillows soften your head, and Egyptian cotton sheets are centuries away from existing. Instead, you're swaddled in a wool blanket, unwashed since last winter, heavy with grime and weighing as much as a small cow. The air is thick with a sour tang, a blend of damp straw, human sweat, and the faint musk of livestock. You blink, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks of your one-room wooden hut, a structure with no windows and an open concept floor plan that forces you, your family, your goats, and a thriving community of insects to coexist in cramped harmony. The church bell clangs in the distance, a medieval alarm clock that's louder and less forgiving than any modern chime. It's your signal to rise, though your body protests with every creak. You're 22 years old, but in this era that's practically middle-aged. Your spine groans like an old wooden door. Your knees crack like a sack of stones rattled by a confused peasant. Stepping out of bed is a gamble. Your bare feet meet a floor that's either slick with last night's rain, seeping through the thatched roof, or crusted with mysterious contributions from your neighbor's wandering chicken. Privacy is a fantasy. Your entire family, parents, siblings, maybe a stray cousin who never left, stirs awake beside you. There are no curtains, no separate rooms, just a communal existence where solitude is as rare as a clean tunic. The smell is a relentless assault, a fragrant symphony of stale beer, unwashed bodies, goat droppings, and something you desperately hope isn't mold but suspect it is. Scented candles are a distant dream, and even if they existed, they'd melt uselessly into the dirt floor. You stretch, immediately regretting it as the freezing air bites your skin, your joints aching from the damp and cold. This is your home, a fragile wooden hovel where every surface tells a story of survival. The walls are thin, the roof leaks, and the hearth, your only source of warmth, sputters weakly, barely keeping the chill at bay. You're never truly alone here. Not with the parasites burrowing into your bedding, the rodents skittering in the shadows, and the 8 other souls crammed into this space, all waking to the same grim reality. But the day has only begun, and nature calls with an urgency that's anything but polite. You brace yourself for the morning ritual, already missing the modern bathroom with a longing that borders on despair. There's no porcelain throne, no flush valve, no neatly folded toilet paper. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is a wooden bucket tucked behind the hut, already brimming because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating those questionable turnips. The stench is apocalyptic, a biblical plague in olfactory form. You hold your breath, do what you must, and then, here's the charming part, toss the contents into the street. Yes, the street, where it joins a river of human waste, animal droppings, and unidentifiable sludge. You're supposed to shout, "Gardez l'eau," Old French for watch out below, but no one ever moves fast enough. Medieval towns are open sewers, where every step risks a slip into humanity's collective leavings. If you're fortunate enough to live near a public latrine, don't celebrate yet. These are wooden benches over pits, where you sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, making awkward small talk while trying not to inhale too deeply. Ventilation is a myth, and the air is a toxic cloud that could double as a medieval bioweapon. Privacy? Not here. You're part of a communal spectacle, where the only thing separating you from your neighbor is a shared sense of resignation. This is mourning in medieval Europe, a daily initiation into a world where survival is a gritty, unglamorous fight. The fleas are awake, the bells are ringing, and your day is about to get worse. You've survived the toilet, a feat that deserves some kind of reward, but in this era, recognition comes in the form of a fleeting sense of relief before the next ordeal. Medieval hygiene doesn't end with the bucket or the latrine. It extends to the absent luxuries that make the process bearable. Toilet paper is a concept as foreign as distant spices. Most folks make do with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if feeling particularly indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain the reluctance for handshakes or close embraces. The rough materials chafe and irritate, leaving skin raw and prone to infections that fester in the unclean environment. And if you're in a castle, you might think it's better, but think again. The garderobe is a hole in the wall, dropping waste straight into the moat below. A clever design until you consider the stench rising on humid days or the audacious attackers who occasionally climbed up through the chute, entering through the most undignified back door imaginable. These facilities weren't just inconvenient, they were breeding grounds for disease, where cholera and dysentery lurked in the shadows, turning a simple bodily function into a potential death sentence. With that behind you, literally, it's time for breakfast, if you can call it that. There's no Eggs Benedict waiting, no coffee machine sputtering to life, certainly no avocado toast to brighten your morning. Instead, you squat near the flickering fire, staring into a wooden bowl filled with something resembling mud scraped from a boot. This is pottage, a thick, gloopy stew of whatever scraps you can muster. Grains, root vegetables, perhaps a handful of beans if fortune smiles. It's been bubbling in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients haphazardly added atop the old, creating an ongoing, edible experiment that could turn toxic with one spoiled addition. On the side, a hunk of bread so dense and hard it could serve as a weapon, deflecting arrows in a pinch. Crafted from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked with sawdust, ground acorns, or other fillers because wheat is a luxury for the wealthy. This loaf demands negotiation rather than slicing, perhaps soaking it in ale to soften its unyielding crust. Speaking of drinks, forget fresh orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're gulping weak ale at dawn. Why? Because the water teems with parasites and filth, making it a gamble with every sip. This small beer, low in alcohol but boiled during brewing, offers higher survivability, and yes, even children partake. No one's thrilled, but it beats immediate death from contaminated sources. Meat or cheese, dream on. Those are reserved for Sundays or saints' feast days, and only if your lord feels generous. Most peasants see meat a few times a year, fresh fruit only in season before it ferments into wine, and spices like pepper cost more than your wages, locked away like treasures. Salt is a precious commodity, hoarded and doled out sparingly, so you chew your gritty bread, swallow the medieval brew, and ignore the rat that might have sampled your porridge overnight. Breakfast doesn't energize. It sustains barely in a world where famine looms like a constant shadow, reminding you that every meager bite is a victory against starvation. Now that you're underfed and fortified with ale, it's time to dress, not that it'll offer much comfort. Your wardrobe is a single outfit, a rough wool tunic or linen shift worn daily for months, perhaps years, until it disintegrates or breeds a fungal infection. Seasonal fashion is non-existent. Gates wear this or nothing with underwear optional, a linen under-tunic if lucky, otherwise commando beneath scratchy, sweat-soaked layers stitched crudely by unskilled hands. No washing machine, no soap, no dry cleaner. Your clothes are stained stiff, scented like a marinating compost pile in a pigsty. Washing requires hauling water from a dubious river, heating it over fire, scrubbing with ashes or lye on a board, and drying in the rare sun, feasible perhaps 3 days a year amid endless rain. Shoes, if you own them, are untreated leather scraps offering no arch support, more like walking on banana peels through mud and dung. Most peasants go barefoot, navigating sharp rocks and disease puddles that turn every step into a hazard. All this means your skin is in constant revolt. You itch relentlessly from fleas, lice, and bedbugs that treat your body as a rent-free haven. Nobles, monks, children, all are walking insect farms. No one escapes. You might scratch your armpit with a wooden spoon mid-conversation with the priest, and no one blinks. Your scalp is a battlefield of bites, raw from rubbing, and a rash means enduring scabies without remedy. No dermatologist or hydrocortisone, just a persistent, unwanted companion for months. These infestations weren't mere annoyances. They spread typhus and other plagues, turning the body into a vector for widespread suffering. Dressed in this misery, wrapped in damp discomfort, you're ready, or as ready as one can be, to step outside and begin the back-breaking labor that defines your existence. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game, not emotionally, but dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. Oral hygiene is as neglected as bathing, which is to say scarcely practiced at all. Some might chew on a frayed twig or rinse with diluted wine or vinegar, but for most, teeth are left to fend for themselves, and they fare poorly. By your mid-20s, your smile resembles something unearthed from a haunted crypt, cavities rampant, gums swollen and bleeding, stains not from food, but from relentless decay. You harbor more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar, where vegetables moulder in the damp earth. Sugar, though not ubiquitous, is creeping into the diets of the rich, imported at exorbitant cost for small cakes or ostentatious displays of wealth, accelerating tooth decay among nobles faster than peasants, who suffer slowly from gritty porridge, fermented bread, and years of grinding labor on coarse grains. Toothaches become your constant companion, like the unpredictable medieval weather, always lurking in the background, a throbbing pain that drives you to desperate measures, praying fervently, drowning it in ale, yanking the offender out yourself with crude pliers fashioned from blacksmith tools. Dentists don't exist. Instead, barber surgeons handle the grim task, the same men who trim your hair by candlelight, now wielding an iron hook to extract molars without anesthesia, the screams echoing through the village like a public spectacle. An infected tooth isn't just agony. Without antibiotics, it spirals into sepsis, turning a simple ache into a feverish death sentence, the same fate that claims lives from minor cuts or boils in this era devoid of germ theory. Halitosis reigns supreme. Bad breath, a universal affliction from unbrushed mouths and rotting food particles, making kisses rare and social interactions guarded. If you're single, judgment falls not on your smile but on your landholdings and livestock, practical assets in a world where romance bows to survival. Your mouth is a battlefield, steadily losing the war against neglect, and with your teeth throbbing like distant thunder, it's time to step outside for the real labor that will test your endurance. Time to head to work, but there's no office cubicle, no desk with ergonomic support, no coffee breaks or prospects for promotion. If you're among the 90% of the population, you're a peasant. Your existence a simple mandate. Labor without dying, all for the comfort of a distant lord who might not even know your name. You rise with the sun's first light and cease only when it dips behind the trees. Your tools a wooden hoe scarred from use, a rusty sickle that bites into your palms, and whatever strength remains in your weary bones. There are no weekends, no clocking out at 5. It's sunrise to sunset 6 days a week, with Sunday reserved for church. Unless harvest demands extra hands, raiders threaten the fields or an infected toe turns ominously black, forcing you to hobble on regardless. The work is brutal, fields ploughed by hand or with oxen if you're prosperous enough to own one, digging ditches that fill with mud, sowing seeds in rocky soil, pulling weeds that choke the crops, and hauling water from distant streams until your spine twists like a gnarled oak. No one inquires about your fatigue or mental well-being. Exhaustion is the norm, a shared burden in a society where rest is a luxury for the idle rich. If you're a woman, the toil multiplies. You don't just labor in the fields alongside the men, but also tend to children who cry from hunger, clean the hut's perpetual grime, cook meager meals over smoky fires, spin wool into thread by flickering light, feed the animals that provide scant milk or eggs, and feign indifference to your husband's lice, migrating across the shared bed. Children start contributing around age 5. No idyllic playtime or schooling, just tiny hands wielding wooden rakes, herding geese or gathering firewood, their dreams limited to surviving the next flu outbreak rather than aspiring to knighthood or scholarship. And if you're not a farmer, perhaps a blacksmith forging tools in a sweltering forge, a tanner soaking hides in foul chemicals, or a cooper assembling barrels from splintered wood. Your days still unfold in poorly ventilated sheds amid fire, fumes, or animal guts, the air thick with hazards that scar lungs and skin alike. The pay is mere survival. Perks include occasional bleeding from cuts or broken bones, mended crudely without splints, fevers endured with warm beer as the only tonic. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day, because idleness means no food, and starvation swiftly claims the weak, your place filled by another desperate soul. Grip your shovel, ignore the blisters bubbling on your hands, and keep digging, for in the Middle Ages your job isn't a career path, it's a relentless endurance test, where every furrow ploughed is a defiance against the encroaching grave. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather, because in the Middle Ages temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weatherproofing. Just wooden walls with gaps wide enough to toss a chicken through, letting icy winds howl inside like uninvited ghosts. Windows, if they exist, are covered with thin cloth or oiled parchment, not glass, which remains a rarity for the elite. The fire in the hearth offers theoretical warmth. But firewood is scarce and expensive. Gathering it from the Lord's forest could lead to fines or even execution for poaching the wrong stick, as forests were jealously guarded for hunting rights. You huddle near the dying embers in your one damp wool tunic, waking with your nose frozen solid, feet perpetually chilled and often damp from leaks, fingers stiff like brittle twigs. Frostbite isn't a medical diagnosis. It's dismissed as bad luck, leaving toes blackened and useless, a common affliction in a time when exposure claimed as many lives as battles. Fast forward to summer, which might sound like relief, but it's a cruel illusion. Your hut transforms into a stifling clay oven. No fans to stir the air, no cross breezes through the sealed structure, and absolutely no deodorant to combat the sweat soaking your layers. You can't shed clothes without scandal. Showing too much skin invites sunburn, insect swarms, and judgmental whispers from neighbors enforcing moral codes rooted in church teachings. Flies descend in biblical plagues, drawn to your unwashed body, and the remnants of last week's goat stew fermenting in the corner, while mosquitoes drone by your ear at night, turning sleep into a tormented vigil amid the cacophony of yelling neighbors and crying infants. In the fields, the sun bakes you relentlessly. No sunscreen or wide-brimmed hats unless you improvise a straw contraption like a desperate scarecrow. And heatstroke is casually termed taking a bad turn, a feint that could prove fatal without shade or respite. These extremes weren't mere discomforts. They exacerbated illnesses, with cold snaps fostering respiratory ailments and heat waves spreading dysentery through spoiled food, turning weather into a silent killer that shaped daily survival strategies. So, you're either shivering in your hovel, wondering if your toes will survive until spring thaws the frozen ground, or sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe raw. And the one constant, regardless of season, is that your clothes still itch unbearably, your food remains terrible, and your next task awaits like an unrelenting shadow. Welcome to climate control medieval style. There is none. Just a raw negotiation with the elements that tests the limits of human endurance. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake from this damp fever dream? Too bad, in medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling and clear like a scene from a pastoral tale. But upstream, someone just emptied a chamber pot into it, or a dead pig decomposes in its currents, infusing every drop with parasites, bacteria, and the microbial hordes of Europe. That's why people drank beer, even children, but before imagining medieval toddlers at tavern kegs, understand it was small beer, weak in alcohol yet boiled for safety. A pragmatic choice over the filth-ridden alternatives. Wine was another option for those who could afford it, unconcerned with sobriety before noon, often diluted to stretch supplies. What about bathing? In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. Prevailing beliefs held that bathing opened pores to disease, making cleanliness a medical risk. Better to retain the protective layer of grime caked on your skin, a barrier against the miasmas thought to carry illness. Communal bathhouses existed in some towns, steamy hubs for gossip and scandal, sometimes evolving into venues for medieval extracurriculars, prompting the church to intervene and shutter many as dens of sin. Even if you dared bathe, it was a laborious production. Fetching water from a well tainted by runoff, boiling it over scarce firewood, filling a leaky wooden tub, and hoping no family member claimed it first, or worse, after. Rainwater collected in open barrels bred insects, attracted bird droppings and grew moss. Hardly the refreshing elixir you'd crave. So whether it's entering your mouth, splashing your body, or irrigating your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less a life source and more a perilous gamble, where one wrong gulp leads to days clutching your stomach in a straw bed, sweating out regrets and contemplating life's fragility. These hazards fostered cultural adaptations, like the widespread use of ale in monastic brewing traditions, but they also underscored the era's precarious balance between necessity and danger, where hydration often came at the cost of health. So you drank the water, or maybe you didn't, perhaps you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick now, your body racked with fever, or a persistent cough that rattles like chains in a dungeon. You need help, a doctor. But in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about polite torture cloaked in theological certainty. Diagnosis begins with the ancient theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, believed to govern health like an internal alchemical brew. Any imbalance, whether from a rash, broken bone, or the encroaching plague, demands correction, often through methods that amplify suffering rather than alleviate it. Cow fever signals excess blood, so the remedy is bloodletting, a dull blade slicing into your vein or leeches hungrily applied to drain your vital essence into a bowl, performed by the local barber surgeon, who multitasks between haircuts and hemoglobin extractions in a dimly lit shop reeking of iron and despair. Feeling melancholic or anxious? That's an overflow of black bile, cured with laxatives or herbal purges that wrench your guts, leaving you weakened and praying for relief while neighbors carve your potential coffin from rough oak. A broken bone or festering wound spells deeper trouble. No anesthesia beyond biting a leather strap or fainting from agony. Surgeries conducted with knives unsterilized since the last crusade, heated over fire not for cleanliness but for cauterizing screams. Germ theory is centuries away. Illnesses are attributed to bad air, miasmas wafting from swamps or graveyards, or divine displeasure at your moral lapses. A stomachache blamed on sinful thoughts, prompting confessions amid vomiting. Without antibiotics, minor infections balloon into life-threatening ordeals, where a splinter could summon sepsis as readily as a battlefield wound. If your condition worsens, more leeches arrive, perhaps mixed with crushed beetles or dubious poultices, a priest hovering at your bedside murmuring last rites, just in case the cure proves fatal. And if, by some miracle, you recover, your fever breaking like dawn over a besieged castle, credit goes to God's pity, the doctor's ego, and the leech's dubious promotion, while you lie exhausted, contemplating the fragility of life in an era where healers often hastened death. These practices, rooted in Galenic traditions passed down from antiquity, weren't mere quackery but the pinnacle of knowledge, blending Roman texts with monastic herbalism, yet they underscored the era's profound vulnerability, where survival hinged on luck as much as law. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling like a caged beast, ready for the one potential joy left, a warm meal to soothe the soul. But bad news, your supper is probably plotting your demise. Food preservation is rudimentary at best. No refrigerators or freezers, just salting, smoking, or relying on winter's chill to stave off rot. Methods that fail as often as they succeed in this unpredictable climate. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has dangled for days in the smoky rafters, swarmed by flies steeped in questionable brine, and possibly nibbled by rats that carry their own deadly cargo. Bread, the staple of every meal, isn't safe either. In lean harvest years, peasants stretch it with bark, sawdust, or clay, turning sustenance into a gritty ordeal. During rye seasons, ergot fungus lurks, a hallucinogenic toxin causing convulsions, visions of demons and sometimes death, like consuming bread laced with LSD and poison, outbreaks sparking witch hunts as afflicted villagers danced madly in the streets. Vegetables appear only in season, turnips dominating with monotonous reliability, boiled, mashed or bobbing in pottage, that eternal hot swamp of mystery ingredients simmering since your ancestors' time, a cultural touchstone of peasant endurance, yet a vector for bacterial woes. Fruit ripens briefly in fall but spoils swiftly without sugar, rare and hoarded by the rich to flaunt their decaying teeth. Dairy gambles similarly, milk sours in ours, butter and cheese harbor bacteria consumed anyway because alternatives mean chewing boot leather for nutrition. Seasoning is sparse. Spices like pepper or cinnamon rival gold in value, reserved for nobility's feasts, while peasants rely on onions, scant salt, and the bitter tang of hardship. But food isn't merely a health hazard, it's political. Game animals belong to the Lord. Poach a rabbit for your stew, and you risk fines, imprisonment, or hanging. Your desperate meal becoming a noose around your neck, in a system where feudal laws protected the elite's privileges over the starving masses. As you sit by flickering firelight, spooning grey stew that tastes of wet burlap dusted with sorrow, remember each bite is a risk, a test of resilience in a world where nourishment often concealed peril. It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed, because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life, it is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night. Not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow, sin, eat meat on a Friday. Sin, think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream, double sin. And yes, hell is very real. Vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail during sermons that echo through stone cathedrals and humble chapels alike. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing that chills the soul more than any winter gale. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. A psychological tool that kept the masses in line, fostering a culture of constant vigilance and confession. You can't read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything for you. That means if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder on the cold stone floors, your knees bruising as you beg for divine mercy. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. This system not only funding the church's grandeur, but also reinforcing feudal hierarchies where the poor subsidize the powerful. Holidays, they're holy days, dozens of them. And while they offer breaks from labor, they're not for fun. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence that could tip the scales toward damnation. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned at stakes in public squares. Witches are drowned in murky rivers. Blasphemers are flogged until their backs run red. And skeptics are quickly reformed through torture or exile. So you go through the motions. You chant Latin phrases you barely understand. You bow before gilded altars. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful. But the church, with its inquisitorial gaze and iron grip on society, not so much. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the filth. Famine and fear plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like being on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education not likely, unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent where literacy might be taught amid vows of chastity. Your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic, perpetuating a cycle where knowledge remained a male domain, limiting women's agency in a patriarchal world. Marriage happens early, really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion not required, often arranged by fathers to consolidate power or settle debts, turning daughters into bargaining chips in a game of feudal chess. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain, because complaining might get you branded a nag or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion, fueled by misogynistic fears that demonized independent women as threats to social order. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best with herbal remedies and prayers, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both, with mortality rates soaring in unsanitary conditions, where infection turned joy into tragedy. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. But don't worry, once the baby is out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, vulnerable to exploitation or poverty. If you're outspoken, dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the church, your role is limited. Nuns lived under strict rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth always ranked below men. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully, their resilience a silent pillar, holding up a society that undervalued them. So far you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hope the local lord isn't in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread. You could lose a hand accused of lying. Your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much, meet the scold's bridle. A metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth for correction. Of course, public humiliations designed to deter through shame and pain. Let's say you're accused of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version. You stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, you're guilty. Another option, you're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished anyway. It's like a medieval game show where the prize is survival, and the host is actively rooting against you, rooted in the belief that God would intervene for the righteous, though in practice, it favored the strong or lucky. And if you're sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds, hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV, spectacles that reinforced authority while providing grim entertainment. Domestic violence completely normal. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children with physical force deemed corrective. Street fights commonplace. You could be beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war always simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone's always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So walk carefully. Keep your eyes down and never trust anyone with a club. In an era where brutality was woven into the fabric of existence, shaping a worldview steeped in caution and resilience. At this point, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you're alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. Just the heartbreaking reality of burying tiny bodies in shallow graves, a grief that hardened hearts and shaped family bonds, in an era where loss was as common as harvest failures. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by 25 your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism, your body bearing the scars of labors that bent spines and calloused hands into permanent reminders of toil. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet: childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. No pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot, midwives whispering incantations drawn from folk wisdom that offered scant protection against hemorrhage or infection. For men, the dangers were different but equally relentless. Farming accidents like a scythe slipping in weary hands, infections from minor wounds that festered without treatment, a neighbor's drunken rage escalating into fatal brawls, a crusade gone sideways, where holy wars claimed lives in distant lands. Even walking to the market could be risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector demanding dues you couldn't pay, highwaymen lurking on muddy roads that turned trade routes into ambushes. Death could also come quietly from the plague, which turned cities into cemeteries overnight, bodies piled in carts as the Black Death swept through with indiscriminate fury, or from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages as crops withered under blight or flood, or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls, ergot poisoning twisting minds into madness before claiming the body. And funerals, you were lucky if you got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth if there was enough space left in the churchyard. Overcrowded plots where bones surfaced after heavy rains, a macabre reminder of mortality. So yes, in medieval times life was brutal, short and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final chapter. The medieval dream dies, but not without leaving echoes of human tenacity amid the ruins. So how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get plague, and barely dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romanticized version of the Middle Ages. Gallant swordsmen, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles and feasts in candlelit great halls. It's a myth polished by fairy tales and fantasy books, Hollywood's gloss ignoring the mud, blood and despair that defined the era. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations. You had a better chance of surviving. But you were still one bad soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial, even nobles succumbing to the same plagues and poisons that felled peasants. Even the nobles weren't immune to misery. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages that bred intrigue over affection. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury. The simpler times weren't simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Everything from childbirth to chewing came with consequences. Life was survival, not leisure. And if you did find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google. What's this weird rash? You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born, your world bounded by village horizons and the unyielding cycle of seasons. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, people still laughed, sang songs around smoky fires, told stories passed down generations, fell in love amid the chaos, and found meaning in small mercies like a bountiful harvest or a child's first steps. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light, forging communities through shared hardships and rituals that bound them together. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics and central heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine and feudalism, so you wouldn't have to. Their endurance a testament to the unquenchable spark of humanity that persists through ages of trial. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie, born Sophie Augusta Friederike von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729. Her birthplace was Stettin, a modest town in Pomerania, then under Prussian control, where her family held noble status but little real power. The von Anhalt-Zerbsts were minor players in the grand chessboard of European aristocracy, their tiny duchy offering scant influence in a world dominated by empires. Sophie's upbringing was shaped by this precarious position, caught between aspiration and obscurity. Her mother, Johanna, was a cold, calculating figure, more social climber than nurturing parent, obsessed with elevating the family's status through strategic marriages and alliances. Her father, Christian August, a reserved Prussian officer, provided discipline but little warmth, leaving Sophie to navigate a childhood of strict etiquette, rigid expectations and constant scrutiny. From a young age, Sophie displayed a razor-sharp intellect and a relentless charm that set her apart. She devoured books, history, philosophy, literature, teaching herself French and German, languages that opened windows to the wider world. She learned to read a room before speaking, a skill honed in her mother's ambitious social circles, where every word could tip the scales of favor or disgrace. This wasn't just precociousness, it was survival. A young girl crafting herself into a tool for greatness in a family that saw her as a means to an end. By 14, her potential caught the eye of Empress Elizabeth Petrovna of Russia, who was searching for a suitable bride for her heir. Grand Duke Peter, of German descent himself, was a volatile young man, and Elizabeth sought a pliable, foreign-born noblewoman who could be molded to fit the Russian court. Sophie, with her noble blood, Lutheran faith and reputation for grace, was the perfect candidate, despite her family's relative obscurity. In 1744, Sophie was summoned to Russia, a journey that would redefine her destiny. She arrived in St. Petersburg, a city of opulent palaces and biting winters, wearing thin German fabrics that did little to shield her from the cold or the weight of expectation. Her mother trailed behind, pushing her forward like a chess piece in a high-stakes game, whispering of duty and opportunity. But Sophie had her own ambitions brewing beneath her diplomatic smile. To become acceptable in Russian society, she converted to orthodoxy, abandoning her Lutheran roots in a public, life-altering ceremony that marked her transformation. She took the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine, shedding Sophie like a chrysalis, burning the bridge back to her German past. The ritual wasn't just about faith. It was a political rebirth, aligning her with Russia's soul while signaling her commitment to a foreign empire. The Russian court was a labyrinth of intrigue, where loyalty was as fleeting as candlelight and every gesture was scrutinized. Catherine, barely a teenager, stepped into this viper's nest with no allies, no wealth, and no margin for error. Her mother's scheming on behalf of Prussian interests only heightened suspicions, making Catherine a potential pawn in foreign plots. Yet she adapted with uncanny speed, studying Russian with fervor, memorizing Orthodox rituals and charming courtiers with a poise that belied her youth. This wasn't mere compliance. It was strategy, a calculated performance to win favor in a court that thrived on gossip and betrayal. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter loomed, a union meant to secure her place in Russian royalty, but it promised more challenges than crowns. Peter was no fairy tale prince. He was awkward, immature, and more enamored with toy soldiers than with governance or his bride-to-be. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat, standing in the shadow of St. Petersburg's gilded halls, could have predicted what would come next. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment Sophie stepped foot in Russia, she stopped being a pawn and began planning how to become a queen. Her early years were a masterclass in resilience, learning to navigate a foreign culture while masking her ambitions behind a veil of humility. She absorbed the court's rhythms, noted its factions, and quietly built alliances, all while enduring the isolation of a stranger in a strange land. The stakes were astronomical. Failure meant obscurity or worse, exile. But Catherine's hunger for greatness burned brighter than fear, setting the stage for a reign that would reshape an empire and etch her name into history. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter in 1745 was less a union of hearts and more a political contract sealed with Orthodox pomp and Russian ambition. At 16, she stood beside Peter in a St. Petersburg cathedral, draped in heavy silver brocade, her face composed despite the weight of a crown she didn't yet wear. Peter, also 17, was a walking disaster, prone to childish tantrums, obsessed with Prussian military drills, and openly disdainful of Russia, the the very empire he was destined to rule. His German upbringing left him alienated in his own court, more comfortable playing with tin soldiers than navigating the complexities of statecraft. Their wedding night set the tone. Peter got drunk, rambled about his military fantasies and passed out, leaving Catherine to contemplate her future in a cold bed, alone with her ambitions. The marriage was barren in every sense, emotionally, politically, and for years physically, as Peter's disinterest and rumored impotence produced no heirs, a dangerous void in a dynasty obsessed with succession. The Russian court was a gilded cage, buzzing with spies, schemers, and sycophants. Empress Elizabeth, Peter's aunt and Russia's ruler, kept a tight leash on the couple, her paranoia fueled by court intrigues and her own childless state. Catherine, ever the strategist, played the dutiful Grand Duchess, perfecting her Russian charming nobles and studying the court's power dynamics like a chessboard. Behind her serene facade, she was a sponge, soaking up Enlightenment ideas from smuggled books by Voltaire and Montesquieu, which fueled her vision of a reformed Russia. She took lovers discreetly, most notably Sergei Saltykov, a dashing courtier, partly for affection, partly to secure an heir, and partly to build alliances in a court where loyalty was currency. In 1754, she gave birth to Paul, her son and the future Tsar, though whispers of Saltykov's paternity followed her, a scandal she neither confirmed nor denied. Letting ambiguity serve her purposes, Peter, meanwhile, grew more erratic, alienating nobles with his Prussian sympathies and open contempt for Russian traditions. He drank heavily, mocked orthodoxy, and flaunted his mistress, Elizaveta Vorontsova, treating Catherine with indifference or outright hostility. His unfitness for rule was glaring, yet Elizabeth's death in 1761 thrust him onto the throne as Peter III. His brief reign was a masterclass in self-destruction. He ended Russia's war with Prussia, ceding hard-won territories, alienated the powerful Orthodox Church, and proposed disastrous reforms that threatened the nobility's privileges. The court seethed, and Catherine saw her moment. She had spent years cultivating allies, guards, nobles, and intellectuals, while presenting herself as the cultured, Russian-loving alternative to Peter's bumbling tyranny. In June 1762, Catherine orchestrated a bloodless coup with surgical precision. With the support of the Imperial Guard, led by her lover Grigory Orlov, she declared herself empress in St. Petersburg, while Peter, oblivious, played soldier at a nearby palace. Arrested and forced to abdicate, Peter was confined to a country estate, where he died days later under murky circumstances, likely murdered by Catherine's allies, though she maintained plausible deniability. At 33, Catherine ascended as Empress Catherine II, sole ruler of Russia, her coronation a defiant statement of power in a male-dominated world. She had transformed from a foreign teenager into a master manipulator, outwitting a court that thrived on betrayal. Her reign began not with a crown handed to her, but with one she seized, proving her intellect and ruthlessness. Yet the real challenge lay ahead, ruling a vast, fractious empire while balancing her Enlightenment ideals with the realities of autocracy, all under the shadow of a coup that left bloodstains she could never fully erase. Now Empress Catherine II, crowned in 1762, she stepped into a Russia teetering on the edge of chaos, a sprawling empire of serfs, nobles, and restless borders held together by tradition and fear. At 33, Catherine wasn't just a ruler. She was a visionary with Enlightenment ideals burning in her mind, inspired by correspondents like Voltaire and Diderot. She dreamed of a Russia modernized, rational, and just. But dreams don't tame empires, and Catherine was no naive idealist. She knew reform had to bend to the realities of a feudal system where nobles guarded their privileges like dragons hoarding gold, and serfs, the backbone of the economy, toiled in near slavery. Her first major move was the nakaz, or instruction, a 1767 manifesto outlining her vision for a new legal code based on reason, justice, and equality before the law. It was a bold document, advocating for the abolition of torture, limits on capital punishment, and education for all classes, ideas radical enough to raise eyebrows across Europe. She convened a legislative commission, a diverse assembly of nobles, merchants, and even peasants to debate and refine it, a nod to participatory governance that was revolutionary for an autocrat, but the commission was more theatre than triumph. Nobles resisted changes that threatened their power, peasants grumbled about their chains, and the sheer diversity of Russia's regions, stretching from Baltic shores to Siberian tundra, made consensus impossible. After 2 years of debates, the commission dissolved without a new code, a reminder that Enlightenment ideals clashed with Russia's entrenched hierarchies. Catherine pivoted, focusing on practical reforms. She expanded education, founding schools for girls and boys, emphasizing literacy and science to drag Russia toward modernity. She reformed local governance, streamlining administration to strengthen her control, and promoted smallpox inoculation, a daring move in a superstitious age, even inoculating herself to set an example. Yet she never touched serfdom, the empire's festering wound. Freeing serfs would alienate the nobles she needed to maintain power, so she compromised, expanding their rights over serfs instead, a pragmatic betrayal of her ideals that kept the aristocracy loyal, but deepened the peasantry's misery. While Catherine reshaped Russia internally, she also played a ruthless game of empire abroad. Her reign saw Russia's borders swell through conquest and cunning. The Russo-Turkish Wars, 1768, 1774, and 1787-1792, were masterclasses in military ambition, pitting Russia against the Ottoman Empire for control of the Black Sea. Under generals like Grigory Potemkin, her lover and trusted advisor, Russian armies seized Crimea and secured access to vital trade routes, cementing Russia as a naval power. The partitions of Poland, 1772, 1793-1795, orchestrated with Prussia and Austria, were even more audacious. Catherine carved up a neighboring kingdom, erasing Poland from the map and annexing vast territories rich in grain and people. These victories weren't just territorial. They were propaganda, painting Catherine as a colossus striding across Europe, her empire now stretching from Poland to the Pacific, a geopolitical juggernaut that rivaled the West. Yet, expansion came at a cost. Wars drained the treasury, and new territories brought new rebellions, stirring unrest among Cossacks, Tatars, and Poles who chafed under Russian rule. Catherine's reforms and conquests were a high-wire act, balancing Enlightenment rhetoric with autocratic control, noble loyalty with imperial ambition. She corresponded with philosophers, patronized arts, and built schools, but never hesitated to crush dissent with an iron hand. Her Russia was a paradox, a beacon of progress in theory, a fortress of feudalism in practice. She wasn't just ruling, she was sculpting an image, crafting a legacy as a philosopher queen while wielding power with the precision of a general. Her reign a testament to the tightrope walk between ideals and reality in a world that bowed to strength. Catherine II's reign wasn't just about laws and wars, it was deeply personal, her private life as strategic as her public policies. As empress, she took lovers with the same calculated precision she applied to governance, each relationship a blend of affection, politics, and power. Her most significant was Grigory Potemkin, a charismatic one-eyed general, who became her partner in both bed and empire. Their romance, beginning in the 1770s, was passionate but pragmatic. Potemkin wasn't just a lover, but a co-architect of Russia's expansion, masterminding victories in the Russo-Turkish Wars and transforming Crimea into a Russian stronghold. Even after their physical relationship cooled, their partnership endured, with Potemkin serving as her trusted advisor, managing military campaigns, and even vetting her later lovers. These men, often young, charming officers like Alexander Lansky or Platon Zubov, were more than dalliances. They were political allies, rewarded with titles, estates, and influence, their loyalty securing Catherine's grip on a fractious court. She navigated the scandals with finesse, never marrying again to avoid diluting her power, a stark contrast to the era's expectation that women rulers needed male consorts to legitimize their authority. Yet, her personal choices fueled gossip, with enemies spreading tales of debauchery to tarnish her image. Catherine countered this with a carefully curated persona, portraying herself as a devoted ruler whose private life served the state. She wrote memoirs, patronized artists, and staged lavish court spectacles to project strength and sophistication, ensuring her reputation as an enlightened monarch overshadowed the whispers. But not all challenges could be managed with charm. In 1773, the Pugachev rebellion erupted, a massive uprising led by Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack claiming to be the deposed Peter III. Promising to free serfs and end noble oppression, he rallied tens of thousands, peasants, Cossacks, and disenfranchised tribes, sweeping through southern Russia with alarming speed. The rebellion exposed the fragility of Catherine's reforms. Her Enlightenment rhetoric rang hollow to serfs crushed by feudal burdens, and Pugachev's populist message threatened to unravel her empire. Catherine responded with ruthless efficiency. She deployed armies to crush the rebels, and by 1774 Pugachev was captured, tortured, and executed, his head displayed as a warning. The rebellion's failure marked a turning point. Catherine shelved her more radical reforms, wary of further alienating the nobility whose support she needed. She tightened control over serfs, granting nobles even greater authority over their labor, a move that entrenched feudalism and betrayed her earlier ideals of justice. The rebellion also shifted her focus to stability over experimentation. New laws strengthened local administration, and she invested in infrastructure like roads and canals to bind the empire's vast reaches. Her correspondence with Voltaire continued, but the tone grew pragmatic. She was no longer the starry-eyed reformer, but a ruler who understood that power, not philosophy, held Russia together. This period revealed Catherine's duality, a woman who loved ideas but wielded an iron fist, who sought progress but preserved privilege to maintain order. Her lovers kept her court loyal, her suppression of Pugachev kept her throne secure, and her pivot to stability kept Russia intact. But it came at a cost. Her Enlightenment vision dimmed, replaced by a realism forged in the crucible of rebellion. She ruled not as a dreamer but as a survivor. Her legacy a complex tapestry of ambition, compromise, and unyielding control, as she steered Russia through a turbulent era with a blend of intellect and force that few could match. By the late 1780s, Catherine II, now in her 50s, was no longer the young dreamer who arrived in Russia with Enlightenment texts tucked under her arm. She was a seasoned empress, her reign a mosaic of triumphs and contradictions. Her later years solidified Russia's transformation into a global power, with achievements that reshaped the empire's identity. She expanded Russia's borders to their greatest extent yet, annexing Crimea, parts of Poland, and vast swathes of the Black Sea coast, turning the empire into a formidable player in European geopolitics. Her patronage of the arts birthed theaters, museums, and the Hermitage's growing collection, signaling Russia's cultural arrival on the world stage. Education flourished under her watch. Thousands of schools opened, and literacy rates crept upward, especially for women, a legacy of her early push for universal learning. She founded the Smolny Institute, the first state-funded school for girls, a radical step in a society where women's education was often an afterthought, planting seeds for future progress, even if limited to the elite. Yet, Catherine's personal life grew lonelier as her power peaked. Her lovers aged or drifted, and even Potemkin's death in 1791 left a void no courtier could fill. Her son Paul resented her, their relationship strained by his upbringing under Elizabeth's shadow, and rumors questioning his paternity. Catherine, ever the strategist, considered bypassing him for her grandson Alexander, fearing Paul's instability would undo her work. She crafted her image meticulously, writing memoirs and commissioning portraits that depicted her as a benevolent, enlightened ruler, but the effort masked a deeper isolation. She confided to friends about the exhaustion of rule, the constant balancing act between reform and repression, and the whispers of scandal that never ceased. Her later years were marked by a growing conservatism. Disillusioned by the French Revolution's chaos, she cracked down on dissent, censoring radical texts and exiling intellectuals, a far cry from the young woman who once debated liberty with Voltaire. Catherine's contradictions defined her. She championed education but upheld serfdom, expanded Russia's might but crushed rebellion with brutality, loved Enlightenment ideals but ruled as an autocrat. These tensions weren't failures, but necessities in a vast, unwieldy empire, where change moved slowly and power was precarious. Her health declined in the 1790s, her robust frame weakened by years of relentless work, yet she remained active, dictating letters and planning reforms until the end. In November 1796, a stroke felled her and she died at 67, leaving a Russia transformed but restless, her son Paul ascending to a throne she'd shaped for greatness. Her legacy endures as one of history's most complex rulers. She turned Russia into a cultural and military titan, laying foundations for its 19th century dominance. Her reforms, though incomplete, sparked progress in education and governance, while her territorial gains redrew Europe's map. Yet, her reliance on noble privilege entrenched social divides, and her suppression of dissent cast a shadow over her enlightened rhetoric. Catherine was no saint. She was a pragmatist, a woman who seized power in a man's world and wielded it with unmatched skill, navigating coups, wars, and rebellions to build an empire that echoed her ambition. Her story isn't just one of conquest, but of resilience, a German princess who became Russia's soul, leaving a legacy that history still wrestles with, part myth, part truth, all extraordinary. In 1994, deep within the jungles of Chiapas, Mexico, archaeologists uncovered a mystery that reshaped our understanding of the ancient Maya. Beneath Temple Theed in the city of Palenque, a hidden chamber revealed the sarcophagus of a woman dubbed the Red Queen, her remains coated in vibrant cinnabar, a scarlet mercury sulfide revered by the Maya for its spiritual potency. Discovered by archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez, the tomb was a treasure trove, a limestone sarcophagus, a jade mask resting near her face, malachite jewelry, pearl and bone necklaces, and offerings of ceramic figures and obsidian blades, all meticulously arranged for her journey to the afterlife. The cinnabar, toxic yet sacred, symbolized blood and rebirth, its vivid hue a testament to her status, likely applied post-mortem to transform her into a divine ancestor. This wasn't just a burial. It was a cosmic ritual, aligning her with the Maya's cyclical view of life, death and regeneration, where the elite were seen as conduits to the gods. The Red Queen's identity remains a tantalizing puzzle, but evidence points to Tzakbu Ajau, the wife of Pakal the Great, Palenque's most famous ruler, who reigned from 615 to 683 CE. Hieroglyphs and historical records suggest Tzakbu, a noblewoman from a nearby city, was a key figure in Pakal's dynasty, bearing his heirs and strengthening political alliances. Her tomb, adjacent to Pakal's in the Temple of the Inscriptions, mirrors his in grandeur, suggesting equal reverence. The jade mask, a symbol of eternal breath, and the elaborate offerings indicate she held significant power, possibly as a queen mother or regent, roles that Maya women occasionally occupied. Yet other candidates, like a royal daughter or another elite woman, can't be ruled out, as DNA testing is inconclusive due to the remains' degradation in Palenque's humid climate. Maya women, while often overshadowed in popular narratives, wielded influence in politics and religion. Elite women like Tzakbu could serve as regents, arrange marriages or perform rituals, their status reinforced by bloodlines and divine symbolism. The Red Queen's tomb, with its cinnabar and jade, reflects this duality, her body a vessel of both mortal power and cosmic significance. Cinnabar's toxicity, causing mercury poisoning if mishandled, underscores the Maya's willingness to embrace danger for spiritual ends, a practice seen in their bloodletting rituals and sacrificial offerings. The tomb's location in Temple 3, built to honor her, parallels Pakal's monumental burial, suggesting a gendered balance in Palenque's cosmology, where male and female rulers together anchored the city's divine order. The discovery shocked scholars, who long assumed major tombs belonged to men, and it highlighted the sophistication of Maya funerary practices. The Red Queen's sarcophagus, sealed with a heavy limestone slab, was designed to protect her spirit, with offerings meant to sustain her in Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Unlike European burials, which focused on Christian salvation, Maya tombs were portals to a cyclical cosmos, where death was a transition, not an end. The Red Queen's legacy endures as a window into Palenque's golden age. Her cinnabar-shrouded remains a testament to a civilization that wove art, power, and the divine into every facet of existence, challenging modern assumptions about gender and authority in the ancient world. The Red Queen's tomb in Palenque's Temple Theed is more than a burial. It's a masterpiece of Maya architecture and cosmology, designed to bridge the mortal and divine. Carved into the heart of the temple, The sarcophagus chamber was sealed with precision, its limestone walls adorned with subtle glyphs hinting at her identity, possibly Tsakbuajao, wife of Pakal the Great. The tomb's design mirrors Pakal's in the nearby Temple of the Inscriptions, with a psychoduct, a stone tube, linking the sarcophagus to the temple's surface, allowing her spirit to commune with the living. Surrounding her were offerings, jade beads symbolizing eternal breath, obsidian blades for ritual bloodletting, and ceramic figures as spiritual companions in Xibalba, the Maya underworld. The cinnabar coating her remains wasn't just decorative. It transformed her into a sacred figure, its red hue evoking blood, sacrifice and rebirth, central to Maya beliefs about cosmic cycles. This paralleled Pakal's burial, where his jade mask and elaborate sarcophagus lid depicted his ascent as a maize god, suggesting a gendered duality, male and female rulers as complementary forces in Palenque's divine order. Unlike European tombs focused on Christian eternity, the Red Queen's burial was a portal to a cyclical afterlife, where death was a phase in an endless cosmic dance. The tomb's placement within temple thirsts, built specifically for her, underscores her status possibly as a queen mother or co-ruler, roles Maya women held in dynastic politics. The architectural symmetry with Pakal's tomb reflects the Maya's obsession with balance, male and female, life and death, earth and sky, encoded in their art and rituals. The Red Queen's discovery in 1994 rewrote narratives about Maya women, proving they could command monumental burials equal to kings, challenging assumptions of male dominance in Mesoamerican history. Her tomb, with its toxic yet sacred cinnabar, stands as a testament to a civilization that saw power as intertwined with the divine, where even death was a vibrant act of creation. Across centuries and continents, another woman's story begins in 1907 in Coyoacán, Mexico, far from Palenque's jungles but no less shaped by struggle. Frida Kahlo, born Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón, grew up in the Blue House, a vibrant home steeped in Mexican culture. Her father, Guillermo, a German-Mexican photographer, encouraged her curiosity, while her mother, Matilde, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent, instilled a fierce sense of identity. At 6, Frida contracted polio, which left her right leg withered and her body frail, confining her to bed for months and marking her as an outsider among peers who mocked her limp. The disease forced her to confront pain early, forging a resilience that would define her art and life. Much like the Red Queen's enduring legacy through her tomb, Frida's teenage years were electric with rebellion and intellect. She enrolled in the National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of few women in a prestigious institution where she dove into literature, philosophy, and Mexican nationalism. Her sharp mind and defiant spirit drew her to the Cachuchas, a radical student group, where she debated politics and flirted with revolution, her wit and charisma making her a standout in a male-dominated scene. By 17, Frida was charting a path toward medicine, her ambition as bold as her colorful skirts, but her life was about to be shattered, redirecting her toward a destiny of art and anguish that would echo the Red Queen's own monumental presence in history. In September 1925, Frida Kahlo's life took a brutal turn that would redefine her path. At 18, she was riding a bus in Mexico City when it collided with a trolley, shattering her body and her dreams of a medical career. The accident was catastrophic. A steel handrail impaled her pelvis. Her spine was fractured in 3 places, her collarbone, ribs and leg broken, her foot crushed. Doctors doubted she'd survive, let alone walk again. Confined to a hospital bed and later a plaster cast at home in Coyoacán, Frida endured months of surgeries, over 30 in her lifetime, and relentless pain that became her constant companion. Much like the Red Queen's cinnabar symbolized an eternal struggle between death and rebirth. With her mobility stolen, Frida turned to painting, her father rigging an easel above her bed and her mother attaching a mirror to the canopy. Staring at her own reflection, Frida began her iconic self-portraits, transforming agony into art with unflinching honesty, her brush a tool to reclaim agency over a body that betrayed her. Her early works, like Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress, 1926, were raw but vibrant, blending Mexican folk art with European influences like Botticelli, her colors bold and her gaze defiant. Each canvas was a battlefield, depicting her fractured spine, her corsets, her scars, not as weaknesses but as testaments to survival. In 1928, she met Diego Rivera, Mexico's muralist giant, whose larger-than-life presence and revolutionary ideals captivated her. They married in 1929, a union of passion and volatility, Diego's infidelities and Frida's own affairs, including, with women like Chavela Vargas, fueling a tempestuous bond that shaped her art. Her paintings, like the two Fridas, 1939, laid bare her duality. The traditional Mexican Frida in a Tijuana dress, heart linked to a European-clad Frida, reflecting her mixed heritage and inner turmoil, echoing the cosmic balance of the Red Queen's tomb. Frida and Diego's time in the United States, 1930-1933, brought fame but also alienation. In Detroit and New York, Frida painted works like Henry Ford Hospital, 1932, depicting her miscarriage, a raw portrayal of loss that defied taboos, around women's bodies, much as the Red Queen's burial challenged assumptions about Maya women's power. Back in Mexico, Frida's health worsened, with more surgeries and chronic pain, yet her output soared. Paintings like My Dress Hangs There, 1933, critiqued American capitalism, while The Broken Column, 1944, showed her spine as a crumbling pillar, nails piercing her flesh, her face stoic yet tear-streaked. Her politics burned bright. She embraced communism, hosted Trotsky, and championed Mexicanidad, weaving indigenous motifs into her work to reclaim her heritage, a nod to the cultural pride of Palenque's rulers. By the 1940s, Frida's fame grew with exhibitions in New York and Paris, where surrealists like André Breton hailed her, though she rejected the label, insisting her art was her reality, not a dream. Her final years were marked by relentless decline, amputations, infections, and a 1953 solo show in Mexico City where she attended on a stretcher, defying death to celebrate her work. She died in 1954 at 47, likely from a pulmonary embolism. Though whispers of suicide lingered, her last diary entry reading, "I hope the exit is joyful." Her Blue House became a museum, her legacy as an icon of resilience, feminism, and Mexican identity enduring, her self-portraits a mirror to the pain and power of a woman who, like the Red Queen, transformed her suffering into a timeless testament of strength.